Howdy folks, old Buster coming to you again with a story. This is Buster and the Boys, the early years. Well now, bless your hearts for reading about the life and times of Buster and his boys. His buddies, his best friends. Now some may relate to this here kind of raising and growing up, but some won't. City folk, you know. Well, old Buster had a few friends growing up, namely old Jimmy Joe when he was 7, and Jimmy Joe was 5, and then Charlie in his and later school years. But that is all another story told when there's more time. The 4 musketeers of brotherhood was Buster, Jesse, Walter, and Hired. Buster being the oldest, 3 years ahead of Jesse. Then come Walter, 9 years junior to Jesse. And last but not least was Hired, 2 years younger than Walter. Now Hired was Buster's oldest of his and 3 best friends. But then come Walter and Jesse. Now Jesse was closer to Buster's age than the other 2 and was raised in part of the South that was nearer to Buster. Walter and Hired was just old Texicans, but good as they could get. Well, all 4 of the boys were cut from the same bolt of cloth. Just each one of them had a bit of a shade of color different from the rest. Only thing is that Walter never could tell the difference because he was a touch colorblind. Now, later on in the stories, you folks are going to find out that all these boys was cousins. And they didn't know that. For real now. This is for real. No, I told you truth is in this stuff. Till they was in their 50s and 60s. But they all done stuff together and been in business together and families together, all that stuff. So just giving you a little background here. Well, both Hired and Walter wore pink, and Buster just dearly loved the color, and Walter couldn't tell the difference, poor feller, to the teasing, you know. Well, Buster was the biggest of the bunch, then Walter. He's about the same size, but didn't have Buster's heft. Hired was, I guess medium size, but Jesse was the smallest of the group and the quietest, but could bow up like a banty rooster now, getting your eyes like a coon. Well, all 4 of the boys was honest to a fault, worked hard, played hard, had the givinest hearts you ever seed, but could ball up like a coon on your head in a heartbeat. And all of them was tough as a nickel steak and with leather to boot. Tender-hearted as all get out. And their mamas loved them all dearly. All the boys had a story of their own, but Walter and Buster come the closest to having it kind of rough in some ways of growing up. Buster's was school and town kids, and Walter's was just the day-to-day living, especially with his older brother, Melvin. Now, all the boys was dang smart as whips too. In later life, that would come to tell on them as they succeeded in the work they done, career, community, church, and helping their neighbor. Now, Walter was a trickster. He was the trickster of the bunch, and Hired was right behind him. It was that cute little boy smile that got him out of a bunch of whoopings. Now, Walter, on the other hand, was the run of his family till he got out of high school and then growed like a weed. 6'4" and about 240. The boy would tussle at the drop of a hat, but didn't start no trouble, but sure could finish it and a grinning all the way. That boy has a way about him that made all the gals and mamas want to give him huggums. Heck, Buster too. But he didn't like Buster grabbing him by the neck and trying to kiss his old head. Well, Buster dearly loved his 3 friends, all the same but all different. They are true brothers to him, to the core. Well, take Jesse, for instance. As close as a brother, he was, and can too, but hard for most folks to read. He was a proverbial book that was judged by the cover. One thing about that boy, though, being, I guess, come by way of Mississippi to Alabama, you didn't know when the boy was beginning or ending his talking. He talked so slow. But anyhow, man, oh man, that was a mistake of judging old Jess like that. He was probably tougher and meaner than a snake, more so than all 3 of the others combined. That boy didn't have no quit in him. Well, Buster's grandpa Gus used to say that if you had one true friend, you were a lucky man. Well, Buster had 3. Lord surely bless Buster, that's for sure. Now, Hired was the one that would take the lead and never look back except to see if the others needed help while following him. he just took to the bit and ran with it. Of course, Walter wouldn't ride a horse or anything else unless it was gray. He read up about them Indians and General Custer. That had to surely inspire Walter. But being a bit sensitive to colors like he was, they just didn't always tell him what color it was exactly. Never forget the time in the barn when Buster wanted to make a chicken lay an egg, and Buster dearly loved to gather eggs. Well, those boys brung in a rooster and told Buster this here chicken lays the best eggs. Well, that danged old rooster flapped those wings of his'n and pecked the fool out of Buster's hands and chased him to a 2x8 that he used to get to the loft. Well, Buster took off running, and the Yellow Jackets got stirred up and stung Buster so bad he swelled up like a toad frog. And to beat that, when Buster slid down the board, he got splinters in his behind and ended up in a pile of cactus. And Buster couldn't sit down for nearly about a week or so. Plumb pitiful, I'd say, but how those boys did howl, laugh theirselves silly till they cried. Well, as I said, Hired liked to instigate, and when he did, Walter fell right in, or vice versa. Well, Jesse would just sit right down and analyze the whole situation. And real good at advising, like the time Buford, boy down the road, come by to go swimming in the canal. The whole Walter knowed that water was ice cold too, like the rest of the boys. They enjoyed the swimming in the heat. Well, the water, like I say, was ice cold on a hot summer day when Buford come by. It was just perfect from that deep well on the place. Well, Hired told Buford he needed a little help milking before they all could go skinny dipping. Walter was up to mischief for sure then. He picked out a cow for Buford to milk, told Buford he could do it through the fence. Well, old Buford reached through the fence and started to milk that cow. Trouble was, the cow turned out to be a bull, and he kicked Buford plumb through the fence, broke boards and all. Well, that certainly was not the end of it, I'm telling you. Buford got up and took off to running. He was so delirated that he was a-stumbling, and when he tried to jump that wire fence, well, he just didn't make it and straddled that fence and went to a yelping. The wire fence was electric, you see, and boy, did it light up old Buford. He tore that fence down and squalled like a pig thug under the gate. Buford never did come back to go swimming again. I wonder why not. Well, boys will be boys, but their mamas did come a-looking for 'em with a willer switch once. They done got into the First Christian Church, Catholic, and Episcopalian Church wine stock they used for communion. Only one they left out was Hired's Baptist Church, because they didn't believe in a drinking. Had to go to his and Daddy's hiding place for that, and that was just too dangerous for them to take that kind of chance. Well, as I said, twixt Walter and Hired, they was always into something. Excepting for one Halloween when they was accused of turning over the outhouse at the old man Thompson's house. Someone done told that they seed the boys running from the scene of the crime, and that just wasn't the case. They seed them running all right, but that was running because old man Duncan was chasing Buster with his shotgun for sparking his daughter. Now, it wouldn't have been so bad, but old maid Thompson was in the outhouse when it was turned over. They heard her all over a town a-bellerin' and a-hollering to beat the band. The high sheriff come by and got her out, and she was fit to be tied, I tell you. Only thing that saved the day for the boys was a circuit preacher riding by on his mule, coming back from a late meeting with that snake-handling bunch of holy rollers. He told the high sheriff it weren't the boys, but the Outman boy that done the dastardly deed. Clyde surely had a mess to clean up the next day. Kind of like the time the boys was down by the pasture fence of the Rollins place. Now, Walter and Hired thought it was plumb fancy to catch up that Shetland pony of the Rollins and have a ride. There was a boy they knowed from town named Billy Kane Bailey, and they had him come along for some fun too. Well, they talked Billy Kane into getting on that pony and riding him. Well, sir, that pony didn't quite take to that idea and was a-bucking like all get out. Then Walter run up in front of that little horse and went to hooping and a-hollering. Well, that dang pony reared up and lit a shuck in the other direction. Ran to the fence and pitched old Billy Kane about a mile high, don't you know. Stopped dating the doornail right at the fence. Billy Kane didn't know. Well, it wouldn't have been too bad, but he got thrown into the cesspool on the other side of the fence and went plumb under. Oh, Billy's mama had to throw away his clothes, which he didn't have many of. Plus had to keep him out of school for a week because he smelled to high heaven. Took a month before any of the kids would come up to Billy Kane. That smell just wasn't going to wear off. Well, Hired was a pickle himself. I told you he liked to instigate. He done talked them into doing some trapping. Said they could get a quarter a hide for a skunk. Well, to the boys, that was a right smart bit of money, because hard cash was something hard to come by. Well, now they went off down on the bayou by the Davis place and set an old trap they found and greased it up with some of Buster's grandma's lard. Sure enough, they had a skunk in the morning. Well, sir, they got that skunk in a tow sack and ready to take him to town for their quarter, but had no way of getting there. So Hired and Walter and Buster had to sneak out to his and folks' 50-model Oldsmobile. Jesse did the scheming, and they sneaked up the keys off the hook and took off. They throwed that skunk trap and all in the trunk and took off to town. Now, all them boys could drive since they was 9-year-old or so getting there wasn't no problem. Into town they went to Robinson's Fur House. Got their quarter and split her up. Had a penny left over. So they flipped for it, and Walter always was lucky and he won it. Well, this ain't the end of the story, because when it rained, that car would smell so bad you couldn't stay in it except on a sunny day with lots of Grandma's mint in the car. Woo, pew! Buster's folks had to sell that car. Got a Pontiac after that. Believe it was a 49. Could have been a 51. Don't rightly remember. But did those boys, and I mean all of them, get into a peck of trouble? No picture show for a month and had to shovel the barn and do the hired hands chores too. Punishment for sure, thought the boys' parents. But you know the boys, they just laughed and made a game of it and still sneaked down to the creek for a little swimming when the folks weren't looking. Mischief, plain and simple, for them 4 boys. Now in school, they was into lots of pranks. The boys only went half a day because they had chores to do at home and in the field. Now Mrs. Letts was an English teacher and was allergic to pencil shavings and deathly afeard of snakes. So you just know this was too good to pass up for the boys. Now Walter went and caught up a garter snake, and Jesse and Hired and Buster had to get all the pencils they could find there at dinner time and sharpen them to the nub and made a pile of shavings. Well, Jessie done put the snake in her top drawer of her desk, and when they all come back from dinner and was a-setting down for class, she opened that drawer. You never heard such a yelling and a squealing. She was plumb mortified and jumping up and down and took to swooning. Well, in come the principal, Brescher, and would he ever have a conniption fit of whodunit? You bet. Just knowed it was the boys. Nobody told on the boys, and class was let out till the next day. Well, as I said, it ain't over till it's over, and all them boys was in the Planters and Thinkers Union, of which old Charlie Snyder was the founder of that little group. Charlie was a friend but lived over in the next county, and the boys would only see him every once in a while on a Saturday. They all liked Charlie, and he was a lot like Howard. All the women folk thought he could do no wrong, cute as a button. Well, the day before they let out for deer season, Jesse got Walter and Hired to make up an excuse to talk to Ms. Letts outside right before class was begin. This gives Jesse time to put the pencil shavings in her top desk drawer. He done saved them up from when the garter snake was put in her desk drawer. Well, when she come in, all the class was seated. She opened that drawer, and then she commenced a wheezing and a sneezing and a coughing. Well, here comes old man Brescher, the principal again. But this time, Butch Lickenbacher got blamed for it, as he was seen near the desk about that time. He was only putting a homework paper on her desk, but he deserved the time for the crime. It was early on that the boy got blamed for pulling the fire alarm during assembly, but it was really Butch. He was seen by Jesse hiding under the stage and laughing up a storm. They got even on that day, I tell you. Well, school was let out early that day too, and off to the woods they went for a week of hunting and eating and card playing and shooting marbles, pitching washers and horseshoes, and listening to tall tales from the men at the camp. Deer camp. What fun. Walter's daddy used to take him to help custom cut grain across the countryside for outside work for extra money. Walter fell in with the hobos and learned a lot from them on how to survive going cross country with no money, how to hop a train and get a meal, and where to go get that. And Walter carries that knowledge with him to this day. Said if and we ever needed to, that he could get us by for a spell. Well, Hired was a real good motorcycle rider. He was professional class. But he done had a spill and knocked out his front teeth and broke a few bones. He quit that after his wreck. Rides for fun now and helps all the boys with their riding skills. But his ma and pa had to go pick up the teeth, take him to the dentist, and get him put him back in. Now, Buster played the football and other sports when he wasn't working and had time from off the chores. He did pretty well at that and got him all bowed up and was a cornbread stout, stoutest of the bunch. He could lift the back end of a Volkswagen car with his left hand and down a half a pint of home brew at the same time. Buster was carrying 4 tow sacks of soybeans or chicken feed from the dock to the bob truck for his and Grandpa Gus at the dryer, seeing as how they had no conveyor. He was a conveyor. That was 480 pounds if you're ciphering on all that. A tow sack of seed beans is 2 bushel, 60 pounds apiece. Now multiply that out. Jesse was always smarter than most and had a mind of his own. Worked at the local radio station for a spell as a disc jockey and part-time reporter. Like I said, the gals all loved Jesse. He went on to be a dang good lawyer, but almost went to flying for the Delta Airline. When they found gas on his and folks' place, all the men folk went to work for the gas company as part of the deal, Southern Natural Gas. Well, Jesse could have done that too, but he wanted to do what he wanted to and to make his own mark, and he did. Well, guess y'all don't recall when Judge Barry was postmaster, do you? Well, back then the boys would come visit Buster down at his and Grandpa Gus's place at Four Forks. Well, Grandpa Gus would give the place to Buster's mama to live in when she married up with Buster's real daddy Russell. He was a ne'er-do-well from Kentucky. That's another story too. But he did give Buster a good name. Buster's people, the Tiptons, they come here in the 1600s. But Buster's other Grandpa Lawrence looked after him while his and Mama worked. Well, anyhow, there weren't no Blue Rock Road back then. Just gumbo and buckshot dirt, and it was pretty dang hard to travel when it rained or sprinkled, and the boys would have to stay over when it did. Well, it'd ball up on a feller's feet or a car tire so bad, not nary a thing could move. The boys had the best time, especially at harvest in the fall. Ripe persimmons, wild plums, fishing, hunting, and camping, sipping Grandpa Tipton's White Lightning, called it Blue Moon because it burns such a pretty blue flame, you know, and sneaking out a pie from one of their mamas when they left it on the old wood stove or window sill to cool. They dearly loved to bask in the shank of the evening. When they put in the Blue Rock gravel on the road so the mail could be delivered, old Judge Barry come down one day after a drizzling rain and got stuck in a gumbo, that buckshot mud. He was trying his darndest to get out, but didn't have no luck. Well, the boys was just happening to pass by whilst gathering wild honey and running from some razorback hogs down in them hollers down in there and jumping them gullies. They needed to get on in before dark, but just couldn't leave the judge by himself. You got to understand, all those boys were stout. Baling hay and working in the field, plus chores made many of those boys prefer the time. Well, they grabbed a hold of that old Jeep the judge drove and manhandled it to solid ground. Well, Judge Barry never forgot about that and them 4 boys, and he also knowed the kind of people and stock they come from. The judge lost his ring that evening and never found it. 40 years later, an old colored feller had one of his grandyoungins show him something he found in a dirt clod whilst he was throwing them and busting them up. There it was, plain as day, the ring. Judge Barry made a real big deal of that in town when they brung it to him. The old man remembered the story being told about the judge losing his ring, and the judge's name was inscribed in it. The old man couldn't read, but he knowed little Jesse, and he went to him and told him about it. By then, Jesse was a roll-tide Philadelphia-type lawyer, and he went with the old man to give it back to the judge. The judge grinned from ear to ear and bought the old man his grandson supper and smoking tobacco and some sweets from Swain's store. He said with tears in his eyes that he was beholden to Jesse and the colored boys for bringing it to him. It had a right smart of a meaning to him. He told Jesse that all them 4 boys were a wonder for their mamas and daddies. He knowed that early on. Then he began to tell about the 3 and what they done for folks in the county. Now Hired and his daddy would pick sweet taters and deliver a wagon load for the folks that didn't have enough to eat. Walter would cut and bale hay and deliver it on the side for their stock and tend to their chores when folks was in need and was stove up and in dire straits. Now Buster, he'd work out and make a quarter a week and would cut firewood for the folks too. He'd take that money he earned and buy milk for the young'uns, and that was going without for him. The judge looked at Jesse over his inspection and said, "Now Jesse, let me tell you what I know of your deeds. Both of us are in the business of law. You have been exemplary in pursuing justice. You have donated your time, knowledge, and skill for the underprivileged and those in need. After retiring, you entered into a new career utilizing all of your abilities to create a reputation beyond reproach to provide homes and medical care to people around the globe. All you boys have succeeded and exceeded in expectations and make us all proud." Now Miss Inez used to let the boys in the picture show, that's the new theater down there, for a nickel when it went to a dime. She would let them take up tickets and seat folks till the picture show started and let them sit in the balcony. They loved that. Even though the balcony was all for the colored folks, they liked that's where they wanted to sit. See right good there. Now all the boys loved Jesus and was baptized. They all went to different churches. Walter was a Catholic and Hired a Baptist, and Buster First Christian, and Jesse a little bit of a Methodist on his mama's side, Presbyterian, and what you call an Episcopalian. It didn't really make no never mind to him as long as the preaching was good and they had Sunday dinner on the ground. And all them boys could eat, but Buster was the worst. When he hit your front door, hide the key to the refrigerator. When he went to the service, he had to get special permission to eat 4 times a day. That's 4 chickens and all the trimmings at supper, breakfast twice a day, dozen eggs, loaf of bread, pound of bacon, SOS, pound of butter, bottle of ketchup, half-gallon of sweet milk, half-gallon of chocolate milk, and a cup of coffee, and whatever they had for dinner. Absolutely no liver or beets, though. He wasn't eating none of that. Then they all went their separate ways. The 4 winds blew them to a new path to knowledge, to a man they wanted to know. These 4 men continued to strive for the betterment of mankind in the healing arts, technology, and spiritual development. This is a never-ending story. The end is in the beginning. The later years. Well, gonna talk a little bit about that. Jesse, he went off to the University of Alabama and become a lawyer. Hired, he's a businessman, excavation, construction, and mining. And of course Jesse was in mining too. Walter was a businessman, and he was in mining and construction and whatnot, and oil refinery operations. And Buster, he become a businessman. He was an ocean engineer, and he was in mining, he was a politician, a doctor, and a writer. Those 4 boys could not forget where they come from. You can take the boy out the country, but can't take the country out the boy, as they say, and that is exactly how it is with them. And ain't nary one of them what they call a racist from the South. The only color when they was growing up was green. Green was money, and you had to go out there and work like a Turk to get enough to eat. So it didn't make no never mind. And all the boys in their kin and family lived by 2 words. Do right. Just do right. Anyway, moving on. Take Hired. He married up with that pretty little snow gal from Alabama and had 4 young'uns. And that gal made the best BLTs this side of heaven and worked like a Turk to make ends meet. And she could take that bacon, oh man, that Hogate butcher, fry it up, put it with grape jelly on a sandwich, and boy, Buster'd eat 10 of them. But let me tell you, she could ride like the wind too. Made no never mind if it was a 4-wheeler, snowmobile, or jet ski. And she could drive anything too. So's to her youngest gal, Sarah. Always made you welcome, and always had a smile on her face. But their oldest, that Chrissy, now she had a lot of dog in her bow wow, like what was hid in her daddy. Come by it honest. Now that middle gal was pretty as a picture, but mean as one of them snakes, the littlest of the bunch. Oh, she was smart though. That gal could do things you just wouldn't believe. Had all kinds of ability and brains. Well, Hired messed with when you get, well, Hired said you don't mess with her when you got her all riled, 'cause she was a banty rooster. The boy had his own way about him and left home for the big city. They liked pets too. They had dogs and cats. But Hired would court danger by messing with them dang rattlers, them Texas rattlers. Just had no sense as far as they was concerned. Scared the tire out of them, I tell you. Hired even put the ugly things in the refrigerator. Buster learned real quick never to open that door without asking. Caved in hungry or not, he wasn't taking no chances. Well, Hired found Alma May whilst he was racing motorcycles. Old big old brown eye and that little old tiny waist did all the things it could to do to Hired to do him in, and it did. Now Walter, he was partial to all kinds of ranch animals. Them Watusi bulls took the cake though. Don't you dare to try to get in that pen and get across that fence. All of them knowed that dang goose was a pain of chasing everybody all the time, but that goose dearly loved old Walter. He would even fly in his window and roost for the night. His better half, Lou Ann, would have a hissy fit 'cause that goose wouldn't let her in the bed. Of course, you had to be a goose and be able to fly, since that bedstead was so high you had to have a ladder to get in it. The other bedsteads was something else too. They all leaned to one side. If you weren't real careful, you'd roll on the floor. Whew, but she does keep a clean house and makes the best cornbread and gravy you ever put a lip lock on. It has never been as good as Buster's grandma's. She is also sunrise and sunset pretty. Now, Walter met her at a rodeo, and she was wearing all white. Had a little shire, and he picked her up when her seen her tried to get across this mud hole and told her to cross that mud hole. Love at first sight, but took the boy 2 years to take her to a dance. They cut a rug now, though. Texas two-step and waltz, they make quite a pair. Walter and Lou Ann had a boy and a gal, and that boy named was Chadro and was a spitting image of his daddy and took up construction at the university. After working with his daddy for a spell, he took up flying, crop dusting, that is, just like his grandpa on his mama's side. Of course, you know the firstborn, especially a girl, is going to look like her daddy, and she does. Fine young woman is married up to a real good feller that's a railroad engineer. Now, if you go to Lou Ann's house, bring your own eggs. She is just not used to cooking up a big mess of victuals, as she has old big boy on a diet and keeping him fit as a fiddle, she thinks, till he gets out and gets one of them burritos and whatnot down on the corner. Now, you wouldn't think Jesse would have a pet, but he cottoned to a dang goat. He also inherited a Mexican Chihuahua dog. Now, that darn dog bedeviled him night and day. Always wanted in his lap, but the goat would come in of a morning whilst Jesse was having his coffee and expected breakfast. Jumped right up on the stool, sat at the counter waiting to be fed. Well, Jesse had to shuck a few cobs of corn and set it out for that goat, or he would butt him till he did. Now, Jesse took a hankering to a gal while he was larnating lawyering at the University of Alabama. The gals pestered Jesse night and day, but he would have none of it now. He was a one-woman man, you know. They had 2 boys and a girl. The youngest boy, Reed, was as fine a young man as you could find. Buster and his wife dearly loved the boy. The oldest is smart as a whip and on his own and making his own mark in the world. But it's the girl that put the gray in Jesse's hair. Buster says we got to get her a tank or a chauffeur once. Never seen one person so snake-bit with an automobile. Ever know anybody to tear off their front bumper and bring it home in the back seat, or drive to a friend's house and park in the yard and have a tree run up and hit your fender? Boy, howdy, she was always calling Jesse for help about some kind of wreck or car trouble. Anyway, she's off to Nashville doing God only knows what, and just doesn't want to be a teacher no more. Uh-oh, news flash. Yvette done married up to Tad and give Jesse a granddaughter. Jesse has had a bit of a time on his hands, but as Jesse says, life goes on, and the 3 other boys aim to get Jesse a new lease on life. Adventures unlimited, as they say. They are treating him, too, for some ailments and expect a full recovery to normal health in due time. Well, time to rehash about Buster and his crazy bird, Perry the parakeet. Well, Buster didn't want the dang bird, but Perry just took the Buster when he was brung home one day. Buster always said that he never had any trouble with critters, old folks, or babies, just the women. Well, that darn bird would sleep on Buster with one eye open. Wouldn't let a soul come near him. Folks would see two little feet sticking out of Buster's mouth and wonder what in the world. Well, Buster taught Perry to give him a kiss, a peck on the lips with his beak. Well, this came about one day. Buster was eating some of them atomic fireballs that come from Walmart, and Perry come over and give old Buster a kiss. Well, those birds don't have no saliva glands, you know. And Perry flew over to his cage, because he got that hot fireball in his tongue, and he just had to get the water. Now, you'd think that crazy bird would leave well enough alone, but no, he come on back for more. Well, I guess or reckon it was because it was sweet. Anyway, that was how the trick come to be. Also, that bird could talk. Learnated to say woo pig suey, go hogs go, Razorbacks. And Perry was a big Razorback fan since they was from Arkansas. Perry even had Buster to call the TV station one day when he was watching the news and had him come on out. There was a parrot that was supposed to talk, but Perry knew he didn't hold a candle to what he could say. Heck, fire, he could talk for 2 hours on the phone. Well, Buster married Lulu after courting for only 4 months. The boys didn't think he'd ever get married up. But the best thing that ever happened to Buster, and he dearly loves that woman, her being a Yankee and all. Bought her 2 sewing machines, a car, 2 4-wheelers, and a motorcycle. She always said she'd marry the first man that bought her a sewing machine, and she did. Well, they met up in Little Rock. She went south, met the best, and forgot the rest. Now that gal can ride too. Ain't got no fear. Between Lulu, Alma Mae, and Luann, I don't know who's the worst for speed. You can't keep up with them women on any kind of machine. Now Lulu is a genuine movie star that was in Hollywood, and she was a trapeze artist too. She got herself a degree in dress design in London and Atlanta, and dearly loves to sew for her passion. Now she takes real good of old Buster since he's been laid up too. They got a son, Darren, raised him, and now that boy has a son, and used to run Buster's company that he founded, but now he teaches autistic kids in a little town in Arkansas. Pretty too. Good looking boy. Black hair and blue eyes, about 6'4", bowed up. Said his dad, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in before. Well, all the gals like him, and he just ain't found the right one yet. Went to college for the most part of 13 years and got himself a 2-year degree too, but had to go back to school to teach school for the kids. Had a good time, passed all the courses. Just played hard and worked on the side too. Got retirement from the Walmart. Well, all the boys in their families got along just fine, if I do say so myself. Sometimes Buster puts his foot in his mouth and the rest of them look over him. They have to. They know he means no harm and just speaks his mind. Of course, the others have a few quirks too, but are all pretty normal. Men of their word, honest as the day is long, believe in Jesus and love their country. You can count on any of the boys at any time, day or night. Well, Jesse goes to bed around 7 o'clock with the chickens in the evening, but gets up early. You must have noticed that the tragedies in each of the boys' lives were not mentioned up to now. They all had them. Heartache and heartbreak. Losses of kin. Mamas and daddies and grandpas and grandmas and brothers and sisters. There wasn't a time that they weren't there for each other. Births or funerals, marriages and divorces, health and sickness, and good times and bad. Those boys have a bond made only stronger with the passage of time. Gets a little more difficult and challenging now that the 4 winds have blown each of them in a different direction. But I can tell you this, every time they come home, they can expect to see one or all of them sitting at the supper table. They ain't going to change. There are lots of family that the boys have, especially Walter. There absolutely is not a better lot of folks on this here green earth, plus his and brothers are hairy-legged and his and sisters pretty as the flowers that bloom after an April rain. But this one older brother of Walter's is a mess if you ever see one. He used to tussle with Walter every born day of his life. Thing about it is, when little Walter growed up, he was to be reckoned with for sure. A little thumping was good for old Melvin Constitution. Now, Ike is the oldest brother and a bit naturally devilish in his own right. Nobody would ever expect he would be up to mischief, but he does. He married up with a gal that's living the Bible and in her faith and holds the Guinness World Record of most points scored in a girl's half-court basketball game, 100. Now, old Ike, he gets up every morning to straddle a horse. He knows good horse flesh and cattle and has a passel of good-looking daughters, too. Now, both of Walter's sisters set many a heart aflame before they married up. Tall and could dance too. Only thing about both their husbands is they don't say much. You know, Buster can't hardly handle that, so he just up and side-fiddles over and hugs them and kisses their old hates. Kinda warms them up a bit, but he just hangs on. Walter tries to run his himself, but Lou Ann says to get him anyway, and good, and he does. Now, Hired has learned to put up with it, and Jesse just grins and bears. Hired has one brother that is a dang good shot, and a sister that is married up to the sacker from the local A&P grocery store. Now, Jesse has two sisters that are sweet as hard candy, and a mama that is truly a real Southern lady. Knows the Bible better than any preacher, too. The boys are Buster's brothers, and he's proud as punch of each one of them. Solid gold, each and every one of them. Now, Buster does have a half-brother, but he doesn't get to see him, or a half-sister he's never seen. Now, every set of the boys as husbands and their wives are princes and princesses and kings and queens, and they're example to their family, friends and neighbors. Well, life is coming to a full circle for all the boys now. Memories, new horizons, new adventures, living dreams. The important things in life are clearer than ever before, and real friends are for life, just like Walter, Jesse, Hired, and Buster. This is their life, Buster and the boys. Well, y'all have a blessed day. Old Buster just a signing out to you. See you again soon with another story. Bye now.